Hello everyone, a Chodesh Tov. I hope and trust that all is well. We are starting a new series today about priorities in Sefira. We are going to talk about those situations in which you have the ability to count Sefira to Omer, but there's another mitzvah that you have at the same time, and the question is which goes first. And we're going to start right at the beginning of what we do every night on a regular night, in which we ultimately have a certain order in which we go. And I'd like to dedicate all the words of Torah that I'm about to say to my revered Rebbe and mentor, Maariv R Aharon Lichtenstein, who I must say, if I'm able to learn clearly and speak clearly, it is only because God gave me this chut to learn under this great man, an Oved Hashem b'chol ramach evarav v'shasa gidav. And I'm going to try to follow his methodology in delivering the following. So everybody knows that the Shulchan Aruch paskins, and this is what we do on the second night of Pesach through the 49th day after that night, achar tfilat arvit, after davening Maariv, matchilim lispor Sefira to Omer, we start counting the Sefira. The question is why? Why is it that we count Sefira actually after Maariv and not before Maariv? And I'll sharpen my question. The Tosfos says that maybe because Sefira today is only D'Rabbanan without the Omer sacrifice, it would be better to count it during what we call Ben Hashmashal, twilight, namely the time between sunset to dusk, simply because the Gemara says that when you count Sefira, you have to always try to do it in a way that reflects the word Tmi Mot, which means a pure day, namely do it at the beginning of the day. So since it's rabbinic, and since twilight might be nighttime, we can use that time as a suffix D'Rabbanan Lekula, a time that is indeed a doubt, and count Sefira then. In other words, counting Sefira at the first possible time is a thing. So therefore, why do we count it after Maariv and not before Maariv? There happens to be a machlokas as to why. Comes along the Chok Yaakov, of Yaakov Reisher, who is a great, huge posek, wrote the book Shvut Yaakov and many other books. His years, 1670 to 1733. He comes along and says in Chok Yaakov, his parish on the Shulchan Aruch, the reason is a very simple one. We all know it. Tadir v'sheino tadir, tadir kodem. When you have two mitzvot and one is more frequent than the other, you do the frequent one first. Since we daven Maariv every night of the year, and we only count Sefira 49 nights of the year, obviously Maariv will come before Sefira. But that's not the reason of Rav Yaakov Emden. In his parish on the Torah called the Mor Uketzia, Rav Yaakov Emden says that can't be the reason. After all, Tadir v'sheino tadir is only when the two mitzvot are equal. And in this case, they're not equal. After all, one of them is Maariv, which is a reshut, maybe an optional mitzvah, definitely a D'Rabbanan, but Sefira may be D'Oraita, at least according to the Rambam, even without the Korban HaOmer, it's D'Oraita. And even if it's not D'Oraita, he says, at least it has what we call Ikar Mefurash Batorah. It has an actual pasuk in the Torah upon which we base the rabbinic obligation of nowadays, and therefore it's on a higher level than Maariv for sure. And therefore he says the Tadir v'sheino tadir thing wouldn't work. And thus he comes along and says that that's not the reason. The real reason is, and that is that sometimes we daven Maariv early. We daven Maariv, and we could daven Maariv from Plaga Mincha, which is an hour and a quarter before sunset or before dusk, and that's not a time we can count Sefira yet. And therefore, in order for people not to make a mistake, we made a policy that we always daven Maariv first because of those nights in which you daven Maariv early and you can't count Sefira. So if Rav Lichtenstein was alive, and he would try to go ahead and think about this in one of two ways. Either he would say his machlokas is Sefira D'Oraita or D'Rabbanan, and therefore Rav Reisher says they're on equal footing. We have to invoke the rule of Tadir v'sheino tadir, and Rav Emden says they're not on equal footing. One is on a higher level than the other, and we can't invoke it. That would probably be the first way he would explain it. The second way he would explain it would probably be, maybe there's something unique about Sefira that doesn't exist with Maariv. Maariv can be davened all night, versus Sefira, which, as we said, should be done at the first possible moment. And therefore, unless there's any other circumstance that would go ahead and cancel it, the laws of Sefira, in and of itself, dictate the first possible moment you should count Sefira. That's not the law by Maariv. Maariv can be davened all night, or at least until Chatzot Halayla, you can say Kriyat Shema D'Oraita. And therefore, from this perspective, they're not on equal footing. Indeed, La halacha, the Biur halacha, the Chafetz Chaim brings both reasons, and Rav Moshe Feinstein doesn't understand why. He says there's a very good reason, tadir v'she'ino tadir. Why do you need to bring this whole convoluted reason of maybe they daven Maariv early and therefore they can't count Sefira? Obviously, to answer Rav Moshe's question, we'll have to say that according to Rav Yaakov Emden, his real issue was that they're not on equal footing. In other words, in his opinion, Sefira is on a higher level than Maariv, versus Rav Yaakov Reisher, who thinks they are on equal footing. May all the words of Torah I just said be a tribute to the huge memory of my esteemed Rebbe, Rav Aharon ben Rav Yechiel, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, and may we continue, Be'ezrat Hashem, his legacy down here on
Ashrei, Shalom, Yishkocheko.